Hello, and welcome back to the Michigan State University Wealth Management Association podcast. This week we have alumni and owner of Walsh Asset Management, Thomas Walsh, joining us. Listen in as he shares about his journey through the financial field, how to own and operate a firm, and balancing and building relationships with clients. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the MSU WMA podcast. My name is Lefty Theodoru, and today we're here with Thomas Walsh.
Good morning, Lefty. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for being here. So jumping right into it, can you tell the audience a little about your career path, what got you into this industry and where you work today?
Well, it's interesting. I'm one of the probably few that had this figured out at a very young age. I took a couple classes in high school at St. Xavier in Cincinnati. One was accounting and one was finance. And I was really intrigued by the finance part. When I went to my undergrad was from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, before I came to Broad for my MBA. And I knew from the beginning I wanted to be a finance major. Back in the day, what I do was called a stockbroker. And a couple of my parents' friends were stockbrokers, and I just found that fascinating. So, even in college, as I was, majoring in finance and focusing on as many investment classes as I could, I knew this was what I wanted to do eventually. So I graduated, and I started actually with an insurance agency where I was able to get my securities license Series 7, excuse me, and then moved on to what was then a small regional bank that you're probably familiar with up in Michigan, Fifth Third Bank. They bought Old Ken a few years ago. They're in the process of buying Comerica, and they become a pretty powerful bank. But I started in their it's called Fifth Third Securities, where there were 3 people in the department, and that's where I really got started in investing. From there, I moved to another regional bank in Cincinnati called Central Trust, which became PNC Bank through an acquisition. And after being there a few years, it seemed that our operation was going to be moved to Pittsburgh. I really didn't want to move to Pittsburgh, and I'd wanted to get an MBA, and that was a point that I jumped off. And my investment professor at Miami had told me, if you get an MBA, your Miami degree is pretty powerful. Try to go to a top 25 school. And I looked around the Midwest and looked at a couple places, but really fell in love with East Lansing and Michigan State. So I came up there and was able to do it pretty quickly. I started in June and graduated the next August. So it was kind of on a sprint course. And came back, and then I had a variety of other jobs. I went back to Fifth Third for a while. Worked at a place called Gradison, which was bought by McDonald, which I think is now KeyBank. But finally decided in 1999 that I was probably a better boss than an employee, because I had jumped around a lot. And I just decided I'm going to do this. And, in our business, it's an easier business to start, I'll say, because you don't have big capital requirements. You don't have to build a building and buy trucks and manufacture things. I had a cell phone and a laptop and a client list, and that was pretty much all I needed. So I founded my business. I call it Walsh Asset Management in 1999, and I celebrated 25 years last year, and that's what I've done.
Wow, congratulations! That is a great accomplishment for sure. So I want to continue to touch on Walsh Asset Management specifically. As an owner of a firm, what challenges have come with that in those 25 years, and how have they shaped you professionally to who you are now?
Well, I think when you own a business, you get into a business because you want to do what you love, which is investing for people and advising people. But there's other things you have to do as a business owner, in terms of payroll and tax filings, and there's a whole lot more you do as an owner. So I've learned a lot beyond just investing money for people. But it's, to me, I tell people I don't feel like I work because I love what I do so much, and I'm doing it for myself and my family. And I tell people, I tell people I work every day, but I don't work all day. So when we go on vacation, my wife and I like to travel. I get up early, get 2 or 3 hours work done before she gets up, and then we're off on our day. And I'll work a little on a Saturday and a little on a Sunday. And if I decide I want to play golf on a Friday afternoon in the summer, then I'll work a little longer on Saturday. So I like that flexibility. But it's really that feeling of having. I've told our kids I'd rather be the king of a small kingdom than a prince of a big one. And that feeling of having your own deal and your own name on the door and your own business is really fulfilling.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's how some people would define success in their business, is having that flexibility, that lifestyle schedule, that balance of life, work-life balance you can still have. And like you said, if you want to golf, you work a little extra on Saturday, and, you have the time to do the things you want while getting the work done still. So that's very good to hear.
Exactly.
So I want to ask you one thing. What would distinguish a truly great advisory firm or an investment planning firm from an average one?
I think that there's not a lot of differentiation probably in the returns between one firm and another. There is, but it's probably not the defining difference. I mean, I think the defining difference is the relationship with your customers. And I like to tell people that, when you start in this business, the first people you call is your family, and then your friends. And I've kind of realized this in recent years, that my family's become my clients, but my other clients have become my family and friends. I have very close relationships with my clients. I look at, if I should, at some point, I'll wind this down, this business down. I don't know when, I don't have any plans right now, but, to bring someone in and turn over clients to them would be really really difficult, because all of my clients are important to me. So I think it's really that relationship with clients that defines, the better firms. Because, I always tell people in any business, but it's particularly true of ours, it's a matter of trust and competency. Because you can have someone who's very competent, but if you can't trust them, particularly with your money, that's a bad thing. You can have someone you trust who's not very competent. That's not a good thing either. But you got to have both. And those that have the good relationships with their clients and have that trust, I think really defines the better ones.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually, you kind of answered the next question I was going to ask, which was talking about how do you create strong and long-lasting client relationships? And I think you answered that with saying, treating them like a family, showing them you care about them, showing that genuine interest in their success, not only your success, but theirs and for their family. And I think that goes a long way, that authenticity right there.
It does. And, the people that I've seen get in trouble in business, whether it's this business or others, are the ones who were chasing revenue. And I always use the example that, Tiger Woods, I think we can probably all assume, is famously wealthy at this point. He didn't choose golf so he could get wealthy. He chose golf because he loved golf and ended up being the best player in the world. And that's how he was successful and, financially, among other things, with golf. But there's some firms that have famously imploded over the years. And they were usually people that put the dollars ahead of the customers and the process. So I think, like I said, doing what you love and doing it well, you'll be taken care of, on the financial part.
Yeah. And building off of that again, to continue to talk about clients and client relationships, when things aren't going well in a client's life or, in the market during their lifetime while you're with them, how do you kind of give them a sense of peace or kind of calm them down and help them realize everything's going to be okay?
Well, I mean, the bigger part from what I do is probably getting them through the tough financial markets. We haven't had one in a while. We'll have one at some point. That they always happen. The last 2022 was a bad year. 2020 with the COVID thing was one of the worst 6 weeks the market's ever had. 2008 and 9, I was there in business with clients. 2001 and 2, I was there. That's where we really earn our keep, because, as I said before, probably the difference in returns between one advisor to the next is not that great. There are differences. Some are better than others, but it's not huge differences. But when you look at the studies, Vanguard's done a study called The Value of an Advisor. And, if the typical advisor charges, on an asset fee about 1% of assets, Vanguard studies showed that the value of an advisor is about 3% a year in returns. And the reasons, maybe they're better at asset allocation, maybe they're better at stock picking, maybe they're better at fund picking. But the biggest component of that is when the markets get tough, talking people out of doing the wrong thing. That's where we make our keep. And that's when we turn into psychologists or psychiatrists, whatever you want to call it, where we have to convince them that the world is not ending, that the market's not going to go to zero, that it's always come back. And I always say, half kiddingly, I mean, if the market never came back and went to zero, we'd have bigger problems than, what the balance of our 401k account is. But and I've had some clients, I call it take the wheel, where I always tell them, I advise, but it's ultimately your decision. It's your money. And I've had a few over the years that in a tough time, have bailed on the market, and it's never worked out. Because if you do that, you got to make two good decisions. One is to get out at the right time, and two is to get back in at the right time. And most people can't even make one good decision on their own. So, those are the times that we really earn our keep. And the analogy I use with my clients is, if you're on a flight somewhere and the pilot comes on and says, we're about to go through some terrible turbulence. The flight attendants need to sit down, buckle in. Everybody needs to buckle in. It's going to get pretty rough. I say, would you walk up and knock on the door and say, hey, let me fly the plane now through this turbulence? And they're all like, no. I said, well, then let me fly the plane. We're in turbulence. Don't you do it. Let me do it. And that seems to resonate with people. And, sometimes, I have, clients, spouse will pass away or something. And those are obviously horrible times for them, worse than anything in the market. And, obviously I have to help them with the logistics of it. But that's another time where you just, if you're a friend to them, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great analogy you made. And that's something I think people who want to enter this profession need to realize, is that not only are you doing the technical side of the work, but you're also being a relationship manager and helping them through just their life events in general. Because if they stick with you, you're going to be keeping them and potentially getting their kids after or something like that.
Right. And I'll tell you, I mean, it's not an easy time for us either. As we're investing money, I tell you, I invest my family's money, basically. I mean, they're all going down. My money's going down. Everybody's money's going down. It just happens, and you have to ride it out. So having those conversations is doubly difficult because I'm not real happy either. But, you have to put on the brave face for them, because I do know it's going to come back. And like I said, if it doesn't, then we have bigger problems.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to change topics here. I see that you have a CFA certification. Can you talk about what motivated you to pursue that, how it helped you and how it shapes your approach when you're investing for clients and advising those clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. My third stop right before Michigan State right before the Broad School, was at this regional bank I mentioned, Central Trust Company in Cincinnati. And I was actually in the investment part of their trust department, and I was a securities analyst. And they encouraged us to study and sit for the CFA exam, the Chartered Financial Analyst. So it's a 3-year exam. Now the timing's been speeded up a little bit. I think you can take it every 6 months. I don't know why anybody would want to, because it's a ton of work. But it's you pass level 1, you move to level 2, you pass level 2, you move to level 3, you pass level 3, you're now a CFA. It is, I've got a page on my website that's got some articles about the CFA, comparing it to other designations. The one that kind of struck me as funny was I found this, not funny, interesting. I found these couple websites that ranked the toughest tests in the world. And the CFA was always in the top 10, usually in the top 4 or 5. Interestingly, the consensus number 1 is the wine sommelier test, which I found kind of funny. But it's an incredibly intensive, curricula. It's investing, it's accounting, it's economics, it's portfolio management. There's probably more to it now. I've seen it described as an Ivy League MBA in investing. But it really shaped me. I learned so much from it. Now, not to say that all CFAs are perfect. I mean, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt 17, 18 years ago, and, they had a ton of CFAs there. So it's not the be all end all, but it's an incredible base of knowledge to work from. I think it's also helped me from a marketing perspective, because there are people out there, potential clients, because I'm an independent advisor. I don't, there are advisors, very good advisors that work for Merrill Lynch and for UBS and different places where they're employees. And I think some people are comfortable with having that big name on the door. Merrill Lynch is a more recognized name than Walsh. Although, as I've told people, Merrill and Lynch are both long gone. I mean, it's still the person you're sitting across the table from. But I think having that in my dossier is a credibility thing that's really helped me, kind of get over that hurdle of not being the garden variety, advisor that they may be looking for with the big name on the door.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important to know, like you said, the differences between that CFA exam and other exams that you could take going into the finance industry or the accounting industry. And it's important to know, what benefits each of them have.
And I will also say, I mean, the other probably more well-known designation, because they advertise, is the CFP designation. And that's a great designation as well. Where mine is the CFA is very, very concentrated in investing. I mean, you see more CFAs probably, managing mutual funds, a lot in private equity, where they're actually making the investment decision. The CFP is a great designation for actually working with clients, because it's not just investing money. There's a lot of planning involved, and particularly as your clients, get a little older, they're more concerned about retirement planning, or they're very concerned about retirement planning. So the CFP also is a great designation to get. It's more general planning wise versus the CFA, which is more specific investment wise.
Sounds good. And one last question I want to ask you is talking about individuals who are my age. Think about where you see this industry going. If you were in my shoes, what are some important lessons or habits you would like to let individuals my age know to prepare them for coming into this industry?
Well, and that's a really good question. The world's, in many ways, but in this way, is a lot different than when I came out of school more than a few years ago. And I remember having a conversation with my next door, our next door neighbor, a friend of my parents, who was he wasn't a stockbroker, he was an attorney, when I was late in undergrad at Miami. And he said, "What are you going to do? What kind of job are you looking for?" And I said, "I want to be a stockbroker," the term at the time I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to try to go work for Merrill Lynch or somebody like that. And he said, "Well, let me give you a piece of advice." And he said, "I think, you're a smart guy, you're a great guy, all these nice platitudes." He said, "But the last time there was a bear market, you were cutting my lawn for $4. And he said, I want somebody who's more seasoned, who has more experience. And you'll have that someday, but you don't have that now. And I would think about other ways you can get to that point down the road," which was some of the best advice I'd ever gotten. Because back in that day, you went to Merrill Lynch and you went through a training. And I mean, I'm just using them because they're a great firm and a brand name. There's obviously others. But you went to a place like that and, you went through the training program during the day. And then at dinner time, you started cold calling people and trying to get business from cold calling people. And most people, like my next door neighbor, they didn't want to entrust their money to a 23 or 24-year-old kid. So that has changed a lot now, because many of those firms are groups where 3 or 4 advisors get together, and then they hire, some administrative assistants, whatever, but they bring younger people in right out of college to apprentice. All right. So they're not doing the cold calling. They're maybe doing the reports. They're learning the business from the ground up. They're getting proposals ready for prospects. They're getting materials ready for client meetings. They're going to those meetings. They're learning. So there's a lot more opportunity there today than there was back then. But I really think that, and I kind of stumbled into it. I mean, I started my business when I was 39 years old. And I think that's as I look back, I didn't do it on purpose. It just kind of happened that way. But that's a really good time to start, because now your friends have accumulated, the people you're going to call on first have accumulated some money. Maybe they're in positions, at companies, or a CFO or something, where, you can get into their 401k plan. But before that, it's really, for the most part, apprentice time. And I mean, 39, 40 is not the be all end all. I mean, it can be sooner, it can be later. But I think, one opportunity is with the wirehouses and getting into one of those groups. I'm part of a group at my broker dealer is called Cambridge Investment Research. They're an independent, one of the bigger independent broker dealers out there. They're a great partner. We're organized as branches. We need to be by FINRA rule. I've got 140 advisors in the branch I'm a part of. Some of them are in groups. Some of them are like me, or more solo. Some of them are in groups. There's a lot of opportunity in those groups, just like there is a wirehouse. So that's both of those are similar, just different channels. Going to a bank. I know Fifth Third in Cincinnati hires 4 or 5 people every year directly into their investment program. I know other banks, JP Morgan does that. I know a lot of other banks do that. The fund families all hire people, all hire, recent college grads. And you're just going in and learning, and whether you're, getting into the portfolio management area, or you're getting into the sales area as a wholesaler or as an internal, those are great places to learn. I think a lot more going into private equity now. I'm not really sure what those opportunities are, because, I'm not really in that arena. But I think there's a lot more ways. I told our boys, it's like, the first few years out of college, it's like you're being paid for additional education. Instead of paying for education, you're getting paid for education. So it's a good step. You're figuring out what you're good at. You're figuring out what you like. You're figuring out what you want to do. You're learning, and you're getting paid, and you're making connections. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go, probably more so than when I was your age. Not to sound like the old guy.
Yep. No, that's a great point you make, is that it's very important to put yourself out there as much as you can when you're young, learn as much as you can, get as much experience as you can, and that'll only pay off for your future.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have today. So thank you so much. And we really appreciate you being part of this podcast.
Hey, thank you, Lefty. I really enjoyed it. Go green.
Go white.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please like and share the podcast on Apple and Spotify. The WMA podcast is part of Michigan State University's Wealth Management Association, a student organization whose goal is to inspire the next generation of financial advisors. Feel free to follow us on social media at MSU WMA and check out our website at msuwma.com. Anything heard on either the MSU WMA or Spartan Journal podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice.